And we are live. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I'm Salvador Cordova, and I'm joined by one of my co-hosts, Emory Moina. He is a graduate student in biology. He's halfway through, and I'm hoping and praying he'll remain at the top of his class.
My co-host.
Oh, I have a little bit of feedback here. Let me try.
That came from me. That's my bad.
Okay.
So I forgot to hit mute on your video because I've got it up in the background. My bad.
So we're gonna continue with the RH Brady talk, but just to give people some time to get alerted and come to our channel from other streams. Not to try to steal from other streams, but there's so many activities I don't even keep track of it. But I'd like to think that you'll get something of value here because I'm not shy about pointing it out. I was voted recently as the #1 YouTube creationist by a panel of evolutionists. So I'd like to hold true to that title and deliver some of the best science arguments and logic arguments or whatever arguments in favor of creationism. And this is why it's really great hanging out with Emory, because he and I are students of biology. And that's why we think that we can deliver some good stuff, because God bless, there are a lot of people that are on YouTube, but who are proclaiming the word of the Lord. But I have to tell you, we're trying to give a different perspective, because both Emory and I are in the peculiar situation that we have to learn how to defend the creationist viewpoint from unbelievers. Do you have any thoughts on that, Emory?
Yeah, I mean, like, in the position I'm in right now in graduate school, I don't do a ton of defending of the creationist viewpoint because I'd like to finish graduate school. But that said, yeah, I am kind of in a weird position because, like, I go to church on Sunday and I read my Bible and I pray, and then I go to graduate school and I get teachers telling me that everything I just read is absolute hooey. So it's kind of a weird position, and like, and I'll just be honest, like, if you aren't in a church and you aren't reading your Bible, you will not survive. Like, it's easier online because you don't have the day-to-day grind interactions where, you just little conversations and so on. It's a little bit easier online. But, like, if you're a 4-year undergrad and you're trying to get through without being in a good church and you're trying to get through without reading the Bible, forget it. You may as well just say, yep, I want to be an evolutionist, because that's what you're telling me.
Yes. And I can't tell you how important it is that we meet other believers. And that's one reason this channel is organized, so that those out there who may feel like they're out on an island, which they are, academia can be very lonely. We try to provide an oasis for support and comfort. And it's been very helpful for me. I'll just say what helped me is meeting people that were former evolutionists who became creationists. They end up being professors at secular universities. I'm just like, that's really powerful. That's the most powerful thing for me personally. When you meet someone that is part of a secular university and is now a Christian, and like that's an individual that really had to change a lot of things in their life and in their viewpoints. And, and it's been very, very comforting. Whereas the homegrown ones, the homegrown creationists, I am a little more concerned for them, because they've been in an environment that's friendly and then they're thrown into a hostile environment. I feel almost a little more comfortable that for someone that's been in a non-Christian environment and then changes, because that's a really big step, and they're in that environment all the time. So that's been the encouragement. So
right, it says a lot more about your character if you make a decision in a hostile environment that could hurt you.
Oh, absolutely.
And, like, guys like, and I know you didn't name him, but I will, John Sanford, immense amount of respect for taking that step in academia. Like that you don't do that in academia if you want to keep your job. Somehow Sanford kept his, but
he didn't get fired, let's say, but they took care of him.
Yeah. I mean, and not remotely surprised by that. They because they don't want. It is a purely secular religion as well as being a scientific paradigm. And so because they've twined the two together, they don't want anyone who's there who does not agree with their religious faith. It's a very authoritarian religion. You must agree or else.
Well, the one that I'll tell you that when I got into the ID and creation community, I was isolated for 2 years. And again, the sad thing is my church gave no support. They're part of the problem, unfortunately, that didn't talk about it. And I've done polls. I said, okay, when was the last time your pastor talked about intelligent design, creationism, or Noah's flood? And it's pretty shocking. Some of the responses I got from once in 40 years or zero on Noah's flood. And there are a variety of reasons for that, but it's still a problem. I'm not going to try today to point too many fingers, but it is a problem. And I've talked to some college students that said specifically that's where they lost their faith. It was things like Noah's flood, evolutionary theory, abiogenesis. And so we don't get support. But for me, it was like a year and a half before I finally met another person, had any contact outside of the forums. And it was Nancy Piercy. And it turned out she just lived a few blocks away from me, which is the irony. And then I met Stephen Meyer, but I was out there, and I may mention it to people in church, but it's like, what's that? I just keep reading the Word and the Bible, and they didn't seem at all interested in the things that we're wrestling with. Mm-hmm. So, for those who are joining us, Emory and I agreed to shoot the breeze just for a little bit, while more people are alerted to this stream. I wanted to say that one reason we do this is it may be of value to people that are in our position, that are going through science curriculum. Some of the more shallow treatments of the topic just doesn't meet the need for people that are matriculating through science school. So the language that we speak here and the topics we cover, these are things that this is helping them deal with stuff, in the 1 or 2 hours that we do this in a stream, and then maybe collectively they get 20, 30 hours. That's nothing compared to the 4 years that they're going to have stuff shoved down their throat for 4 years. If that's only the degree, if they go to grad school, it'll even be more. Mm-hmm. Yep. And so I know this may sound technical and laborious, but this is the sort of tough medicine that they may need to help them get through it. And we're willing to show that we're going to engage the best arguments out there. And one way to do it is to actually use their literature that is kind of hidden. Then you could see that internally they recognize the things that we've been trying to say. It's just not going to make the popular science press, but it's there.
Yeah. So a lot of this stuff, they just won't talk about. It shows up like once in a while, in a great while, and there's actually some of you, I haven't made this. There's going to be an announcement video going up sometime this week probably, but I'm going to be kind of transitioning my website to a little bit more of an in-depth, because a lot of the stuff I've been writing has been kind of more, I don't know, puff, but it's been more at the lay level, and I'm going to try and start bridging a gap between lay and a little bit more depth. So basically, so you guys are getting a sneak preview of what's coming. But so I'm going to try and write some stuff, a little bit deeper stuff. But yeah, basically what I mean is that I was going somewhere with that. I can't remember where I was going. Oh no, it's because I'm going to try and write some stuff with a little bit more depth, because I think that there's a need for that to a certain extent. But there's some, they'll occasionally say stuff that even makes the popular science media, but usually you have to go digging. Usually you have to go digging.
Yeah, and it says to the rest of the world, even though there are very few of us and we're spread completely thin, there are very good arguments, and we're not shying away from dealing, because what they'll do is they'll say, just learn some more. Mm-hmm. And then you and I did that. And it's like, oh, well, thank you for encouraging us to have better arguments. Really, they thought we basically called their bluff. They thought we would just kind of, people like us would kind of just be intimidated away, because it is hard to learn the material. I mean, I really thank the viewers for kind of looking into this, because you get a taste of how hard we have to fight collectively. And I wanted to encourage, if we meet other undergraduates, there's actually a lot of research that can be done that's not that bad, because there are so many different organisms. Like right now, a pet project is the butterfly. Mm-hmm. But there are other creatures where we could examine and really make the case for special creation. So, someone might be out there to specialize in one thing. And if they go on to an MS program or a PhD program, they could be experts in it, and they can make a contribution. If society holds together, which I know is questionable, I think there could be a lot of discoveries. I mean, we're seeing people kind of come out of the woodwork. We're still in the minority, and I expect we will continue to be. But we'll see people like Richard Smalley, who was James Tour's boss, Nobel Prize winner in chemistry. He rejected abiogenesis and evolution. A Nobel Prize winner. And, people are ragging on James Tour. I said, the reason why a Nobel Prize winner changed his mind? It was because James Tour brought Hugh Ross. And Hugh Ross ministered to Richard Smalley, who was kind of a slightly militant atheist. But Richard Smalley came to the Lord. And really, sometimes I don't know to the extent of his personal life how this influenced his change, but he was fighting cancer for 11 years. I have a feeling that it was either when he got diagnosed or shortly before that James Tour finally confronted him and said, hey, you need to listen to Hugh Ross. Which, by the way, I know Hugh Ross and the Old Earthers get an earful from the Young Earth creationist. Hugh Ross did a lot for me when I was struggling. I don't agree with his viewpoints on cosmology. But the Lord appoints people. And that was a big deal, that he could move in the hearts of people like Richard Smalley. And we also, I don't believe James Tour is a Young Earth creationist.
He is.
But what he has done, how the Lord has appointed him, I feel it's lifted the community, both now and I think for a very long time. It's having an effect, because finally someone at his senior stature stepped forward and called out an entire industry as being basically fraudulent. So I'm really excited, and I'm just saying I'm actually hopeful that the case for creation will move forward. Maybe I was naive to think that everyone would sign on to it once they saw it. I'm not that naive anymore, but I think the people who have a heart for the Lord, who may be sitting on the fence and like I was 20 or so years ago and saying, I'm not like an anti-theist. I'd like to believe the Christian faith is true, but I need some better arguments than what I've been hearing. People like that will probably be joining us in the ranks, and they'll be valuable. Those are, those are the people that I'm looking forward to helping. So, why don't we try to summarize a few things? Now I'm going to show. Let me see if I could show the thumbnail. We'll summarize a few things from yesterday. So this is from a paper I was writing, and that's where I got the thumbnail. So this is the stuff that they try to throw at you and say, look at all this math. Look at all this math. How can, this is so unassailable. What do you have to say? So they're throwing this in my face 20 years ago. But first off, I actually did understand some of the math, and I was willing to dig through it. And after I dug through it, I'm like, the idea of evolutionary fitness is an empty concept, and it does affect our conception of natural selection. So this is some of the work. This is cutting room scraps from some work I did with Bill Basner, because Bill Basner worked with Dr. John Sanford. They got published in the Journal of Mathematical Biology. Their paper set records for the number of downloads for an open access paper for the journal by a huge margin. And Bill called me up. He said, "Can you work?" And I said, "Well, you need to ask Dr. Sanford, because he's the one who's paying me." And Dr. Sanford assigned me to work with him, and I worked with Bill Basner for about 4 months. And in the process, I'm like, "Bill, this is just such an empty concept." And he said, yeah. And so I made a presentation to a private group, and in the audience was Dr. Paul Nelson from the Discovery Institute. He said, "Hey, Sal, what you found out independently, a lot of other people have found, and also some of the top population biologists have realized this. It's just not in the popular press. But let me send you a paper that explores this," and that's the paper we're exploring tonight. So while I try to get the paper up, Emory, do you have some thoughts?
No. Okay, so I'll just throw a little bit out here, like just from reading the paper last night, and as Sal said, like, I kind of came without the math. I kind of came to this same or very similar conclusion on this, because I kind of went, well, I was reading through the literature and going, this doesn't add. This logically just doesn't work. And it was actually so bad, I actually put a post out on my personal real name Facebook page, and basically asked some of my science friends, like, what is natural selection, guys? Like, what do we even have here? Do we have anything? Because I'm reading papers left, right, and center, and I'm getting nowhere. Like, and so they were helpful. They gave me some papers, but I think, and just kind of go into the paper from last night. Basically, what we got through last night was, a significant section on what a tautology is, and when it's useful and when it's not useful, and to just kind of recap that a little bit. A tautology is basically a way of saying the same thing twice, but a tautology is not a causal explanation. In other words, a tautology can't explain causation. It just explains what is. It's not a scientific explanation in any way, shape, or form, which the Darwinists absolutely hate, because they love to define natural selection as a tautology. So, Sal, have you got the paper ready to go?
Almost.
Right.
I'd like to acknowledge our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. This is why we're doing this. And so, Emory, I felt you explained well, what's the relevance to the Christian faith that we're going through all of this?
Sure. So basically, the relevance to the Christian is, we're taught, you go to, and even in the graduate school level, sometimes you'll hear this, that you'll be told that natural selection, Darwin came up with this idea of natural selection, and natural selection explains the diversity of life on Earth. We don't need God. We don't need a special creative act of God or anything like that. And I think, as I said last night, that I think a lot of people who are just plain, honest, good work, hardworking people who don't have a science background, who aren't into science, who don't inhabit the nerd world that Sal and I and some of the people watching inhabit, they kind of go, well, I don't know what to make of that. And because they don't know what to make of it, they themselves probably won't leave the church, but their kids will. Because their kids are going to ask questions, and they won't have the answers. And so I think it's very important that we give people answers on a level that they can understand. Because they obviously, let's just be real here. Most people don't have the time, inclination, or knowledge base to read the Brady paper and understand it. But that's okay.
Yes.
That's okay. That not everyone is made to do the same thing. That's perfectly fine. The issue is where we need people like Sal. I mean, not so much me, because I mean Sal's the guy with like 50 million degrees. But we need people to kind of fill that middle ground and say, okay, yeah, here's what they're saying. This is what they mean. This is why it doesn't work. And that's kind of what we're trying to do tonight.
Exactly. So part of this process, because we know that there are people that are watching this channel, some of them will not be named, but there are people I have good relationships with. And it's like, this is telling them, I am trying to be, I'm not just trying to quote mine. We are reading the whole thing in its entirety. You may disagree. I mean, some of the people on the other side may disagree with how I've interpreted, but I've at least, we're going to read the whole paper and you could see it. Mm-hmm. It's not like we're trying to hide anything. Yeah. And
unfortunately, the paper is quite long, so it takes more than one night.
Yes. So it's also educational for people like myself and Emory, hopefully to other science students. But then we would like to distill it and make it more accessible. But I think it's also good to see that there is this language here that kind of gives it an air of, I mean, this is a good paper, but there are other papers that are bad papers. But the fact that it's sometimes not so readable kind of gives it an air of authority and as if they have some actually deep knowledge or insight. But then when you probe, it's like vacuous. Right. Like I tried to show this earlier. I was showing, let me put that up on the screen. I was showing this math here, and it can look intimidating. But there's nothing of substance here. I mean, it'll look like, people worked on this stuff for 30 years, and you'll just think, oh, that math is so profound. In fact, I'll say this. Richard Dawkins called this theorem that this paper is trying to illustrate what we call the discrete version of Fisher's fundamental theorem. He called it the biology's central theorem. Biology's central theorem. So you, Emory, as a graduate student in biology, did they ever teach you what biology's central theorem is? Could you?
Nope.
No.
I deliberately went and took, I didn't have to, I deliberately went and took a class specifically on sexual selection, specifically because I wanted to get into the selection aspect of stuff. Never came up, not one.
Exactly. And you see that? Who said that? It's on Richard Dawkins, and then it ended up on the Royal Society webpage on Sir Ronald Fisher. And I'm like, okay, you see how myths are perpetuated? It won't actually be in the textbooks. It's not taught to biology students, and I know that. Example right there. And yet, to the popular press, there's this myth that these problems were solved. And Dawkins will say, yeah, Ronald Fisher was the second greatest evolutionist, and his book, his writings on this, have supported it. And then you actually scrutinize what's there. And I was like, it's interesting math. The math, again, these are tautologies here. I'll show you the tautology right here. For the discrete version, if you could see my cursor, that's the discrete version of Fisher's theorem. Mathematically, it's correct, but it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. It gives the impression that they actually solved the problem, and they never did. In a few obscure papers, you'll see that they actually reject it. In fact, what's embarrassing, especially for people like Richard Dawkins, he'll be proclaiming this as biology's central theorem, while at the same time, professional population geneticists are saying they have a very negative assessment of his theorem. Maybe it's not that good. It's not useful. This all came out actually when Bill Basner and John Sanford independently kind of came at the same conclusion and published a paper where they added mutations. But even maybe 1 or 2 decades after, all the responses that came in response to Bill Basner and John Sanford publishing in the journal Mathematical Biology, it was really kind of funny. They said, "Oh yeah, we knew that it was a bad theorem." You're late to the party. And I was like, huh. So one segment of the population thinks this is biology's central theorem, and the actual specialists know the truth. To their credit, they've mentioned it, but no one knows. You need someone who's digging up these obscure papers to actually see it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And they do not make any effort to tell the textbook writers or the general population that, all that stuff you were taught in college, we've all kind of moved on from that now, but
right,
we're not going to tell you about it.
Yeah, and that's what's happening with the abiogenesis thing. What James Tour did in his 15-part series is he's taking textbook organic chemistry and synthetic chemistry and just ripping apart the abiogenesis industry. And it's like, that doesn't end up in the textbook. It should. He used nothing but mainstream science.
Mm-hmm.
So just all this to say that this is the state of affairs. Thankfully, we have there have been enough people with some integrity to actually be self-reflective, like RH Brady's paper. So we're gonna dig into this, and it's like Proverbs 14, 4. The stable is clean if there are no ox, but there's much strength in the ox. And we're going to be cleaning up a lot of doo-doo here. I feel like I'm my job is not a scientist. I'm a janitor. I'm cleaning up the doo-doo that's just been being produced. And it's like, there's so much of it, piles of it. I'm just trying to build a little oasis of like sanity here.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so some highlights from the paper, and then we'll move on.
Yeah.
Because this is yeah.
So just a brief, very brief summary of last night. We talked about what's called tautologies last night, which would be it's a repetition. Repetition has some very useful aspects. We talked about that in terms of math the other night. But Sal has highlighted probably the best line of the entire paper. So Sal, go ahead.
Okay, this summarizes. This is a metaphor for evolutionary theory. If our theory had the form, for instance, of the German saying, "If the cock crows from the manure pile, it will rain," or it won't, empirical test would be precluded. You see, there's no way to falsify this claim. And that's one of the problems with aspects of natural selection or fitness. And that's a big part of evolutionary theory. Now, I'd like to acknowledge Ben Rex, the gentleman who goes by the handle BenRex777. He's actually, he can speak German, and he is familiar with this proverb. And he did say it's kind of funny. And then I'm going to highlight, if you have the paper there, maybe you could read, there's something by Waddington. Okay, and we'll just kind of uncoil this. a little bit, but
yes.
do you have that
This
section
quote,
there?
yes, I've got it. I'll read the section from Waddington. And if you start laughing hysterically midway through this, don't worry. Sal and I might too. Natural selection, which was at first considered as though it were a hypothesis that was in need of experimental or observational confirmation, turns out on closer inspection to be a tautology, a statement of an inevitable, although previously unrecognized relation. It states that the fittest individuals in a population, defined as those which leave the most offspring, will leave the most offspring. Once the statement is made, its truth is apparent. This fact in no way reduces the magnitude of Darwin's achievement. Only after it was clearly formulated could biologists realize the enormous power of the principle as a weapon of exploitation. Sorry, yeah, I almost made it.
Okay, so if you're wondering why we're laughing, and again, even then, it's couched in kind of like language, a statement of inevitable, although previously unrecognized relation. Okay, that's really thick academic language,
right?
But maybe the way to say it is like, "Thank you, Captain Obvious." It's a statement of the obvious. The one that makes the most offspring makes the most offspring. Defined as those, see, but it's still couched in this thick academic language as if there's something really profound there, and it's nothing.
Yep. And just so in case anybody forgot, Brady takes this to school. So for those who may want to debunk this, it's not us that are laughing at this. Brady's laughing at it. Listen to this. Few lines down. It is, to begin with, extremely difficult to believe Waddington's claim that the idea that individuals who leave the most offspring do in fact leave the most offspring was at any time an unrecognized relation. But it is very clear that biologists might be slow in recognizing the explanatory power of this formulation. If the fact of deafness is to be explained, how does it help to suggest an impairment of hearing? If differential reproduction is to be explained, what light is shed by pointing to differential reproduction? We already know that some individuals leave more offspring. What we want to know is why. So for those of you who will come along later, and you know exactly who you are, who will try to debunk this, don't try to debunk me and Sal. Debunk Brady. Because me and Sal didn't say it. Brady did.
Yeah.
Now, we agree with him, but, I mean, come on. This should be common sense. Just because creationists are actually capable of reading and understanding the technical literature, which, by the way, some of the people who debunk it aren't, and you know who you are too, just because we said it and read it, we didn't write it. Brady wrote it. We're just telling you what Brady said. Anyway, that's my mini rant for the night.
Okay, now I need to, when I talk about, can you explain what obfuscation is?
Sure. So obfuscation is essentially the idea of deliberately saying something in such a way that it's confusing or the meaning is hidden. So basically, it's trying to obscure what is going on or obscure a meaning or something like that, to deliberately hide something that really should be made obvious. And there's quite a bit of that in this particular realm. And so we still have Captain Obvious on the screen. I don't know.
Yes, I'm gonna.
Okay.
I wanted to cover one thing.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
I'm going to remove Captain Obvious until I just want people to say, when we talk about obfuscation, sometimes it's deliberate and sometimes it's unintended, but it has the effect of obfuscating.
Right. Like when a scientist writes in jargon, he could be trying to obfuscate, but he also could just be writing in terms in which he himself is familiar.
Exactly. And then so what ends up happening is, in these arguments, you just will cite these papers that the scientists have said, and they use that language, and it does have an effect because it sounds like they've actually stated something profound. And what I'm actually looking for, if you give me a moment.
Sure, that's fine. So
I wanted
so
to
what I
give,
can,
because we're talking about natural selection, and I mentioned this yesterday. I want you to see how it's defined in population genetics. Let me see if I can get this.
I'm going to guess without knowing what you're going for, Sal, and say badly. Because population genetics is a train wreck.
Okay, this is all right. This is graduate level textbook definition of natural selection. Okay, so we're going to contrast this with the way Brady's take on it. And yesterday we had some discussion on. I said the way Brady is describing it's not exactly the way I've heard it. And it's like, yeah, so I'm going to give you, and I specifically cited Felsenstein. And so today I looked this up because I saw it in his book. So this is how it's defined in population genetics. Natural selection can be viewed either narrowly or broadly. Narrowly conceived, it is simply one class of violations of the assumptions of the Hardy-Weinberg laws, namely the cases in which variability or fertility depend on genotype. Like, oh my goodness. All right? Thick.
Mm-hmm.
Broadly conceived, it is the primary force which causes evolution to be adaptive, the creative and progressive element in the evolutionary process. So there's a reason I talked about obfuscation. In this case, I mean, I really respect Joe Felsenstein. That's not his intent. He strikes me as very much a straight shooter. But you could see that this doesn't add clarity to trying to understand what natural selection is. Because as you go, I've slugged through his population genetics book, and I got the feeling like, do I understand what they're even talking about? What fitness is in the process? I mean, I can work the math, but how does this play out in the real world? How does this play out in the real world? So I just wanted to say, okay, this is how you might, how a student of biology, if he actually jumped into the area of population genetics, which is very, very specialized, this is what they might be confronted with. It's like, okay, and you compare how Darwin or your typical evolutionary biologist will conceive of natural selection. They will not normally say it is simply one class of violations of the assumptions of the Hardy-Weinberg laws.
No. Matter of fact, I don't think I've ever seen it defined that way.
Right. So this is going to be a minefield because, what they'll say is you're stupid because you're defining it one way. And it's like, well, other guys define it that way. I'm not the one who's stupid. The problem is you guys can't agree on the definition.
Right.
But that's the game that'll be played on you. And so I'm just throwing this out. I wanted you. I'm glad you saw it. That's the kind of manure I had to dig through.
Yeah, and this is why Sal, I think the population genetics to you.
Okay, but an outsider that sees that might be really impressed and say, this is really deep knowledge. It's profound. I can't imagine that even 5 years of study, I'd be able to figure it out. And of course, you could be intimidated to think they actually have something of substance. And, we need to kind of make this more accessible so that you could actually see it. And there is math that might be simple enough that we could actually do that. And maybe after we're done with the paper, we'll have some sessions where we just work through some, what I would consider moderately simple math, not too many terms, and you'll actually see it. So, we can now move. See, we were at the hand of nature.
Miscommunication.
Okay, miscommunication and testability.
Yes, miscommunications on testability.
Oh, before I forget,
sure.
If there are questions in the chat, I'm going to try to monitor it. Tag me.
Yeah, and I've got my double screen up tonight, so you can tag me as well if you've got a question for me.
Yes, by all means, because we want to our goal is to go through this paper, try to make the language a little more accessible. One thing that's kind of unfortunate is some of the concepts. That's why I was showing the picture of Captain Obvious. Some of the concepts that are trying to be communicated in this paper are not that hard. But unfortunately, Brady also does suffer from kind of that academic language that it's a little bit thick.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying, try not to be intimidated. We're going to try to explain it. And maybe we'll try to do a better job of making it accessible.
Mm-hmm.
So take it away, Emory. Thank you.
Miscommunications on testability. Although I have argued that the original form of natural selection was free from tautology, I am well aware that critics have continued to voice the accusation. But most of these
time out.
Go ahead.
So he said the original form of natural selection was free. That may be true. So you could see that it got transformed, and that was a criticism of Lewontin. The population geneticists subtly changed it, but they still used the same term. And you could see that. They said it's violations of the Hardy-Weinberg laws. That is nothing. I mean, that didn't even exist in Darwin's time.
I'm not even sure Hardy or Weinberg were born when Darwin formulated natural selection.
Yeah. Okay, so this is something we have to wrestle with. One group will say, look at all that we built, and they actually are building it from a different definition than what Darwin. So I'm sorry to interrupt you. Okay, go ahead.
No, that's fine. That's an important point to make. But most of these criticisms are really concerned with the manner in which the researcher operationalizes the Darwinian concepts. After all, when we attempt to investigate the process by which selective pressures lead to increased fitness, we need some way of identifying in the organisms traits that represent fitness. Okay, that's a big deal right there. That you need a way to be able to determine what traits are equivalent to fitness. Okay, keep that in mind. That's important to think about. Darwin's own language indicates some difficulty on this point, and the situation may not have improved with time. No kidding. Recent statements by prominent biologists, for example, suggest that no clear criterion of fitness has yet been found. And that hasn't changed since 1979.
And that hasn't changed since like the very beginning.
Yeah.
This is on, and Dapper Dino and I had a very polite civil discussion on this, and it's like I got to put it on the table. But if we were going to debate this more, and by the way, Dapper, if you're listening, still I think the world of you. I would have put on the table papers like this and said, let's just read through this, because this isn't Sal. It got to feel like this is Sal articulating his thoughts. I think it'd be better to say this is people in the evolutionary field, and I was just being the messenger here of what they themselves have said. So please go on.
Simpson, 1953, remarks that, quote, the fallibility of personal judgment as to the adaptive value of particular characters, most especially when these occur in animals, quite unlike any now living, is notorious. Let me translate Simpson's statement for you.
Okay.
Basically, Simpson says personal judgment is lousy at determining which traits influence fitness. Right? That's a translation of Simpson that is stripped of the academic jargon. Dobzhansky, who, by the way, is the same guy who said nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution, he said this, was willing to go even further, concluding that no biologist can judge reliably which characters are neutral, useful, or harmful in a given species. And keep in mind, this guy is, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to give an example. Could we give some examples? I cited intelligence. Yeah. And we have all these papers now that saying natural selection is selecting against intelligence. So what do you do with that? We have found in the modern day that women who are very bright, there's a very large proportion that never have children. There are women of lower social standing that have tons of kids, and I'm trying not to be too insulting, okay, but you know what I mean. That has raised concern about the trajectory of the human genome on the whole as far as intelligence. So what do you do with that? You're going to say intelligence is a fit trait, but then biologically speaking, in the present day, if we use some of the definitions of fitness, it's not. And,
Well,
colloquially,
well,
I say this jokingly, stupidity is a fit trait. Intelligence is deleterious.
Yeah. But I mean, Sal, we all know that it might be to the benefit of humans for us to get dumber and dumber until we lose our minds entirely. We all know that this is true, right, Sal?
Yeah, we have a certain YouTuber that has said that. I have him on tape. Caught him in the act of just telling it like it is.
I just had to quote that since you brought me as an example up.
Yeah. All right. So I'm trying to put a little flesh on that problem that they said. It's so hard to determine. Let me now put it back up on the screen here. No biologist can judge reliably characters are neutral, useful, or harmful in a given species. See, we could have a debate on whether now intelligence is useful, harmful, or neutral. Because if we use the population genetic definition, this is going to put a wrinkle in all this.
And keep in mind, the people that he has just quoted, both of them, hardcore evolutionists. These are not creationists making this statement. This is the evolutionists themselves. And you can't go to the old canard of quote mining because we didn't dig the quotes up. Brady did.
Yep.
So let's move on here. With such comments in the literature, it should surprise no one that a few individuals begin to wonder whether the process by which fitness is supposed to be optimized can be investigated at all. Again, Brady, not us. This is all Brady.
And I will say it can be investigated, but you have to redefine fitness in terms other than reproductive success. Because if you define it in terms of reproductive success, stupidity is a favored trait in human females right now. All right?
I would argue, based on the trajectory of humanity, that stupidity is just a favored trait, period. But let's move on from that.
Okay. I mean, so what they say by a favorite trait, we use the word beneficial. Stupidity is beneficial. Lower IQ is beneficial. Higher intelligence is detrimental. We use the word deleterious. It's to be selected against. We're just using their terms, and that's when I began to say, oh my goodness, this whole thing is a farce. This thing pretending to be science is a farce.
Yep, this whole thing is just it's one long joke. It really is.
Yeah.
So moving on, in his Harper's article, Bethel, a journalist, argued that researchers were compelled to identify fitness with survival since the research program had no way of identifying in the total animal what traits conferred what advantages. Darwin, he pointed out, had developed the theory from the analogy of human breeders who have the desirable traits clearly before them because they themselves have defined what is desirable. So let me pause here and just make an analogy here to something I'm very familiar with, and that's fish breeding. If you're going to breed a fish, and you want to get this fish nice and colorful to sell in a pet store, you know what you're going to do? You're going to pick out the males and the females that have the best coloration, and you're going to breed those together. And then you're going to say, okay, now I'm going to take their babies, and the ones that have the best color on those, I'm going to breed those together, and just on and on down the line. And that's what Darwin was appealing to. But see, me selecting for better color does not necessarily select for the overall benefit of the fish. As a matter of fact, it inbreeds them. It creates problems. This is why domestic dogs have so many issues. Because they're wildly inbred. Like, you take a Chihuahua. First of all, who in the world thought it was a good idea to breed a dog that is 100% useless and looks like a rat? Okay, there's the first. And by the way, I like Chihuahuas. They're cute dogs, but whose idea was that? Okay, that's point one. Point two, that dog is riddled with mutations because in order to get a dog that's like that's that small and looks more like a rat than it does a dog, what you end up with, you have to inbreed. And inbreeding concentrates mutations. And the evolutionists know that this is in the literature. This is nothing that I'm not saying anything here that's groundbreaking. The evolutionists know this, and they talk about inbreeding all the time. This is not, I'm not jumping out on a limb here, right? But a human breeder might pick a trait and say, hey, that dog looks like a rat. That's a desirable trait. We're going to make more of those. Why you do that, I don't know, but apparently somebody did. But that doesn't.
Chihuahuas are cute. They're cute.
I mean, maybe they just wanted to have a dog that could fit in women's purses. I don't know. But the overall point being, that doesn't help the dog. It does nothing for the dog. It does an awful lot for the woman who wants to carry a cute little puppy around in her purse all the time. But it doesn't really help do anything for the long-term health of the dog.
Right. It's a dead end.
And that's the point. Human breeding, human selection doesn't select for the betterment of the organism. Human selection selects for what the human thinks is good, which may or may not be good for the organism. So, do you have something you want to add on to that, Sal?
I was just saying I think Chihuahuas are cute. That's all I had to say.
Well, I mean, I actually don't mind Chihuahuas. I actually kind of like Chihuahuas. But I'm sorry, like, I don't know whose idea it was to breed a dog that looks like a rat. I really don't. I can't. Anyway,
that is an interesting point. If we are, they'll say, well, it is still being selected for because, we're increasing its survival advantage in the environment of humans. It's like, okay, we'll grant that. We can grant that. But again, it only shows then kind of the subjective, the fitness is defined subjectively, because definitely in that case, it's like desirable to humans in their purposes. It just shows that the whole idea of fitness in the Darwinian, in the kind of the more modern sense of fitness it's very unstable. And that's the problem I had. Darwin might have had actually a slightly better conception, but I think even then he was confused. Yep. And we're gonna, we'll just go through the paper and then I'll have some more afterthoughts. I don't want to interrupt the flow of thought.
Yeah, and actually he's going to point something out here that's relevant. But as Darwin admitted, we do not readily perceive the relations that confer actual survival in the animal. If fitness could not be detected independently of survival, said Bethel, then any attempt to operationalize the concept with regard to actual observations would wind up equating it with survival, making the argument tautologous. We are really testing the survival of the survivors, which is true. This argument was answered by Gold, 1977, who argued that a criterion of fitness independent of survival was indeed available. Quote, now the key point, certain morphological, physiological, and behavioral traits should be superior a priori as designs for living in these environments. These traits confer fitness by an engineer's criterion of good design, not by the empirical fact of their survival and spread. It got colder before the woolly mammoth evolved its shaggy coat.
Whoa. I'm sorry I didn't bring that to my debate with Dapper Dino.
Yeah, okay, so walk us through this.
I'm presuming that's Stephen Jay Gould?
That would be Stephen Jay Gould. I can't think of anybody else.
Whoa. Well, we could... I'm going to lose my...
Let me go to the references. I'll jump down to the references and make sure. But I can't think of anybody else writing in the 70s who he'd be quoting. And just put his last... Yep, that's S.J. Gould, 1976.
All right. So... I was being characterized in the blog sphere, in the YouTube sphere, as being like, I'm really idiosyncratic for, and I'll just say this, great minds think alike. Look, traits should be superior a priori as designs. Mm-hmm. These traits confer fitness by an engineer's criterion. So people that saw my debate with Dapper Dino, I was throwing out engineering conceptions, and God bless Dapper. He's a super guy. He was saying, well, you can't just come up with a simple figure. And he did have a point. And I said, yeah, you have a good point that at least fitness can be described by a single figure. And at the time I was like, yeah, I think you're right, because engineering criteria, you don't have a single figure for describing the fitness of an engineered system. I'll give an example. We have a variety of aircraft. And if you looked at their performance characteristics, you have a laundry list of characteristics, like how much cargo it can carry, how fast it can travel at certain altitudes. And you have all these humongous numbers of tables. And you're like, what it does is it said, this aircraft is fit to operate in this environment and carry this sort of cargo. And it can do this or that. And it's just huge tables of numbers. It's not one number. And Dapper was saying, well, that's kind of problematic because you can't just throw one number. And I was like, well, engineers don't do that. And the criteria we use to determine if a system is fit for a certain environment, it depends on the thing engineered. Like, yeah, this should be Captain Obvious trivial. The performance characteristics of a lawnmower, you have one set of listings of what it does, like the specifications of its gas tank and whether it's self-propelled. Whereas if you're trying to describe an aircraft or a submarine, you have a totally different set of criteria to judge it. And so Dapper said, well, the nice thing about the evolutionary definition, you can apply it universally to everything. And I do believe I acknowledge this point. And he said, well, the problem with what you're arguing, Sal, is you need a different set of criteria for every system. And I'm like, yeah, but I thought about it. I said, is that really a problem? Because you're actually telling it the way it is. Mm-hmm. In very detail. And Gould here actually was echoing my thoughts. So I say, great minds think alike. Thank you, Stephen Gould. Thank you, RH BRADY, for finding that quote, because I don't have the patience to read through Stephen J. Gould. So he saved me. That was probably
Gould is a tough read in some cases. He can be tough. I've read quite a bit of his stuff, but some of it is a bit of a slog. Some of it is like, ugh.
Some of it. Okay.
I'm being nice yourself. Anyway.
All right.
Anyway, moving on. Gould is speaking not merely of single traits, but of their integration in a good overall design.
Design.
There it is again. He's quite correct in his interpretations of the intent of Darwin's hypothesis, and his logic is beyond question. If an animal were well designed for the environment, it would do well in that environment, since it obviously is what we mean by well designed. So that's a tautological statement. I thought that wasn't he finished the sentence. And the sum of the right traits would equal such design, which is what the theory says. But of course, the sequence is not definitive. It's not definite, rather. Gould supposes that the cold came first and that the wool after, because that is what his theory postulates. His remark is therefore maybe a hypothetical example of the proposed relation. Gould's answer received accolades from such diverse quarters as Carl Sagan, 1977, who thought that viewing natural selection as a tautology was, quote, quaint, and Peter Medawar, 1978, who found Gould's reply a, quote, a pretty accomplished hatchet job on the unlucky Mr. Tom Bethel. Yet while Gould clearly demonstrates that Darwin did not formulate natural selection as a tautology, he never gets around to discussing what Bethel actually claimed. That's familiar. I.e., that the research program inevitably reduced the principle to tautology in practice. He, being Bethel, made the argument as follows. A mutation that allows a wolf to run faster than the pack only allows the wolf to survive better if it does, in fact, survive better. But such a mutation could also result in the wolf outrunning the pack a couple of times and getting first crack at food, then abruptly dropping dead of a heart attack because of the extra power in its legs placed an extra strain on its heart. Fitness must be identified with survival because it is the overall animal that survives or does not survive, not the individual parts. Bravo!
And I think we can pause here a little bit. First off, when they said Tom Bethel, I'm like, oh my goodness, he's a reporter. And he was one of the very brave individuals. So this is, if this is 1979 and he's citing Bethel 1976, Tom Bethel was part of the media class, but he was a dissenter. And he got involved in this intelligent design debate. And, there are other news things to cover. So he weighed in on this. I had the privilege of meeting him personally at a Discovery Institute function. He passed away recently. And now I see why he's so revered, because he really was pioneering. And because of the persecution in academia, you have outsiders like Phil Johnson, who was an attorney, and then Tom Bethel. You had a lot of the ID movement and creation science movement had been pushed forward by people who are outsiders, because the insiders would get kicked out. So that's just a side note. But on to the meat of the details. You see, this is, again, I'm going to harp on the intelligence phenomenon. We could see that intelligence is valuable for certain environments. If you're going to be a particle physicist, it's a good match for that environment. You don't have to frame it in terms of survival advantage. And in my debate with Dapper Dino, I said, okay, and I could have done in retrospect, as we learn, I could have done a better job in presenting my case, but I said, a whale is adapted for water. It's not adapted to a desert environment. You don't have to state it in terms of survival advantage. If we do it in terms of characteristics of a system that could operate in a desert environment, or like, say, a living system, you don't have to state it necessarily in terms of survival advantage, although those traits lead to survival advantage if they're in the right environment. Okay, if you throw a whale out into the desert, it's going to die. But we can actually explain it in terms mechanistically, engineering-wise. It doesn't have the locomotion to be able to move around in a desert environment. It's optimized to operate in sea. So in that sense, it does result in differential reproductive success, but you don't have to frame it as the final result. You can determine it in terms of engineering criteria.
Right.
And that's harder. And I realized why they may have had a tendency. They want to do things like physics, where you have very simple formulas. You can actually fit major theories of physics, all the foundational, on one page. I actually saw it. I was just kind of horrified. I said, yeah, that was my 5 years of, that was years of undergrad and grad school. You could summarize all that I studied on one page. And they're trying to generalize. They're trying to, they're suffering from physics envy. They want to generalize one idea and just make it a cure-all, end-all, and it doesn't work, because this isn't like physics. This is like engineering. We have all these special cases. So we'll talk some more on this. This is gold. I'm glad you're doing this reading with me, by the way. I hope you're benefiting.
Oh, this has been amazing. All right, so moving on with Brady. And just to the point here, in my reading, a lot of what you're going to see when they talk about fitness, they're going to talk about fitness of genes, of an individual gene. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, you can't do that, because the gene isn't what survives and dies. And let me just illustrate this really very simply for you. If you gave, say, a wolf a gene that gave it some kind of great advancement, you can pick whatever great advancement you want, but at the same time that wolf was born with only 3 legs, it doesn't matter how fit that gene is, the wolf's going to die, right? And it's just a very simple example. You can't take parts and try to measure the fitness of the parts to determine the fitness of the whole. You have to determine the fitness of the whole, not the parts. So hopefully that makes sense and is nice and clear.
And because I had the privilege of working with Bill Baster, and this is one of the benefits of not being since we're talking about wolves, it's a benefit of not being a lone wolf.
Yes.
Because when you're in a community, they can find papers and share them with you, because there's a lot of literature out there, and Google's not going to find find conceptually important stuff. I mean, it'll help with search terms. I'm going to throw just briefly what you were talking about, the problem of fitness of individual genes, and then it gets tied to the fitness of the other parts.
Mm-hmm.
This ended up being a major theoretical problem. It basically crushed the population genetic industry as far as arguing that fitness always increases, because it created some problems. Because if you have traits that are conflicting, and they have you worked with linkage equilibrium or disequilibrium?
A little bit.
Okay. So sometimes what they have, things like genes are physically linked, like they're on the same chromosome, and sometimes they're inherited together. And it's, they're linked. And so you may have a good trait that's linked to a bad trait.
Yes.
When they began to explore this, they said, what happens? And they realized, oh my goodness, we have no idea where fitness is going to go. A mathematician by the name of Patrick Moran looked at this, and I'm just going to briefly now this is where this is math heavy. The theory was full indeed, the rise and fall in circulation of maximizing methods in population genetics. Okay, now that is a really thick title, but this is in 2016, and it's pointing out mathematically the problems that you're identifying. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is like adding insult to injury, that even mathematically it's falling apart because of the problem of you're dealing with a whole organism. Mm-hmm. It's very hard to say, okay, we can try to model individual fitness of genes, but it's all mixed together. You get effects that you don't know how this is going to turn out. You can end up, and this is something that Dr. Sanford realized, because of this linkage, you can end up perpetuating a bad trait.
Mm-hmm.
Bad in the engineering sense, because it just piggybacks. So this defective trait, just because it's physically linked to a good trait, you just keep pulling it along. And so it's having the net effect that you have what would be considered a bad trait always piggybacking on a good trait, and it never gets out of the population. And that contributes to genetic entropy or genetic deterioration. And this was found out mathematically. And it was such an alarming discovery. Some people bailed out, like Lewontin, of this whole thing about fitness. He said, this is an intractable problem. It's a problem that it's not intractable. It's insurmountable on principle.
Yep.
And he's basically saying we can't just keep going down this road. That's another paper we should read. He said the 4 problems with evolutionary theory. That was one of them.
Yep.
That was one of them.
I guarantee you, all 4 of the problems have not been solved. I've not read the paper, but I guarantee you, if you read that paper today, those 4 problems are still there.
Yeah. And by the way, Stanley Salty, and it's too bad that I've since lost his original essay. Mm-hmm. He said he read that paper by Lewontin, and he's a professor of evolutionary biology. After he read that, he gave up on Darwinism. He signed the Discovery Institute dissenters from Darwin, even though he's not an ID proponent. He was disillusioned with the whole industry at that point. So that's another great essay to read. And so people ask, Sal, why are you a creationist? I said, atheists and evolutionists have done a good job of making me a creationist. I just read what they write.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. They have no answers in their atheism. There is no answer in atheism. None. Yep. And their attempts to provide them by means of evolution fail miserably every time they try.
Right. And this is an example right here. So this is the dirty laundry that's popular science will not highlight, the textbooks will not highlight, but the experts know this is a problem. And occasionally this leaks out in peer-reviewed literature because, I think maybe they're clearing their conscience here.
Right. Yep. So here is, so returning back to Brady. The individual trait must be summed in the whole before we know how useful it actually is. Since the summing is beyond the knowledge of the investigator, he does not derive survival from his knowledge of engineering. He observes the fact of survival, then attempts to explain this by reference to design.
Design. I love the fact he keeps using the word engineering and design.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How do we know that an animal is optimally designed for an environment? Optimally designed. It keeps getting better. It survives in that environment. Thus, no matter how we explain good design after the fact, the criterion used for the quote for the detection of good design is always survival. The problem. Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry.
The problem and response have been adequately described by David Hull, another guy that's not a lightweight.
I didn't know that. So this is great.
Yeah, no, Hull is Hull did a lot of phylogenetics. That was what his big thing was. Speciation. Okay. That's his field, and that's something that I nerd out about. So that's why I know his name. Who saw this dynamic very well. Quote: if one only knew enough about the genetic makeup, the embryological development, and the physiology of the organisms concerned, as well as the vagaries of the environment, one could assign a certain degree of fitness to each of these organisms and hence be able to make a reasonable predictions about their chances of survival. With this information, one could in turn predict subsequent changes in the population, unquote. We do not have this information, but even without it, Hull concludes we are compelled to explain, quote, the evolutionary development of a particular species or population as such cannot be predicted with any reasonable degree of certainty. Predictions are possible only to the extent that a population or species happens to fit one of the patterns of evolution which have currently been discovered. One is tempted to rush by all such pragmatic consideration. Perhaps biologists do not know all the relevant variables and could not combine them meaningfully if they did. But surely nature does the summing for us. In principle, every organism that dies without leaving issue has a coefficient of fitness of 0. No matter that two individuals are identical twins with the same genotype, one could have an extremely high coefficient of fitness and the other a very low one, depending on how many offspring each leaves. The appeal to this retrospective deterministic bias is difficult to resist. If one individual dies without reproducing itself and another succeeds in leaving numerous offspring, something must have been responsible for the difference. Something presumably did make the difference. And as Gold suggests, we may theorize that those designs which may be termed, quote, superior a priori are the answer. But if we allow nature to do the summing for us and assume that the process has culled out the highest sums or best designs, we are reduced to concluding that the survivors must be, by definition, the best designs.
Oh.
That stings.
Tautology.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Who's the fit? The ones that survive. Which ones survive? The fit ones. How do you know they're fit? They survive. Well, why did they survive? Because they were fit. Why were they fit? Because they survived. On and on. That's exactly what that is.
Yes. And again, I'm sorry to harp on the intelligence thing. Okay, a bacteria doesn't have the intelligence of a human. It's generally accepted. I mean, it's actually kind of depressing to go through Dr. Sanford's references, what other population geneticists are saying. The prospects for the human race are not good.
No, they aren't. I've read that book. And
yeah. I mean, okay, so like, not that I'm going to jump on the climate change bandwagon, but perturbations to our environment in general could easily wipe out human beings compared to bacteria. So the stupidest, brainless, most mindless species have a higher chance of survival than the human race. But it's hard to run away from the fact that the human mind is elegantly designed. There are more connections in the human brain than there all are switches and routers in the internet. That was one study that pointed that out, and people were just like, wow. So from an engineering standpoint, and James Tour even pointed out with the chiral-induced spin selectivity, We could not build a computer that could operate on, like, say, 10 watts, like the human brain, because if we implemented it with regular technology, you'd need an entire power station in the megawatt range.
Yes.
So I'm going to just throw this in there. What's happening is, and James Tour quoted in passing, and it's the field that I'm interested in, biophysics, particularly molecular biophysics. But that field is just fascinating on so many levels, because what they're finding is, in an engineering sense, these things are optimized at the limit of physics. We cannot build optimization at that level. One example was the chiral induced spin selectivity, enabling the brain to operate at about 10 watts versus megawatts, which would mean our brains would incinerate just to be even thinking if we used conventional computer technology. So what ends up happening is they're saying, if we extended this maybe on long time horizons, the best designs are stupid bacteria. Mm-hmm. Yep. And yet that just seems something wrong in saying that.
Yeah. And this is actually something that was touched on in one of my grad classes, where they're trying to figure out, like, why genome sizes are, like, they're trying to explain why some things are more complex than humans at the genomic level, but other things aren't. And they're trying to figure out evolutionarily why that is. And they're hitting their heads against a brick wall, because they can't really define genetic complexity, because they don't know, like, they don't know why some organisms that are seemingly less complex than humans have much larger genomes. So it is a complex problem for them. It is a complex problem. So let's pick up where we left off, if I can find it. Okay, so it is this twist that catches Bethel's attention. If the researcher detects fitness by survival, however that individual reasons about which traits confer which advantages after this fact, it is clear that no tests will be forthcoming.
Oh.
Yeah. We may indeed hypothesize that the organism survives because certain traits capable of selection confer fitness upon it, but operationally we have allowed survival to stand for fitness, thus identifying the two, and we cannot meet the requirement of that two independent observations can be compared. Our claim that fitness causes survival seems to be reduced in our operational procedure to the claim that survival causes survival, which explains nothing. It is perhaps unfortunate that Bethel talked of tautology here rather than lack of testability, which is his real point, for the charge of tautology always leads defenders back to the theory itself, which is not tautologous. Even so, it led Gould to explain that Darwin presumed a causal relation between the design of the animal and the structure of the environment. But Gould's response is equally unfortunate, since it seems less than candid. Did he just call Gould a liar?
Probably so.
Ouch!
And that would be unfortunate. I think Gould is a stand-up guy. After all, Kurt Wise was a student, so I wouldn't. I mean, personally, I would never say that. I would say he's mistaken. So, okay.
Right,
one of the few times I'm going to disagree with Brady. Okay.
No, I agree with you. I just, like, I couldn't believe he just said that. Okay.
Okay.
Brady and Gould have something going on. Anyway, moving on. By the way, I don't think Gould necessarily is a liar, although everybody's told lies, so I don't know. But, I don't think he is. That's not what I'm saying, but I was just shocked that Brady said it.
Yeah. And you know what? There's no need to put this in a peer-reviewed paper, okay?
Yeah. I'll be honest, that's true. That probably didn't need to be there.
Yeah.
Just being real. But I couldn't believe that it showed up in a peer-reviewed paper.
But we'll let it go, because Brady has had some real gems in here, so we're not going to let that one go.
And by the way, that's actually, as much as this should not show up in a peer-reviewed paper, this happens a lot, where people who don't like each other will take digs at each other through peer-reviewed papers, and they'll say stuff like this. Go ahead.
Oh, especially if they're digging on creationists, that'll
Oh, yeah. Well,
Easy.
everything on creation is just it's all going to be ad hoc because most of them don't even know what we teach. So it's just going to be mostly ad hoc. It's not going to be much of anything else. So one would suppose that a reader as sophisticated as Gould could have seen that Bethel understood Darwin's assumption and was merely questioning whether it could be made operational in actual research. Yet Gould does not rise to the argument on detection of fitness. From Bethel's point of view, Gould's response must have seemed more playful than serious. Ooh. Again, I think Brady must not like Gould for some reason.
Yeah.
Anyway, those designs that are, quote, superior a priori must be superior in some specific way. In this case, they are superior strategies for survival. From this, it follows by definition that they will be the survivors, nature having done its sums properly. It also follows that the survivors must be, a priori, the superior design, i.e. fittest. Best of all, since all this follows by definition, we need no research program to investigate it. In other words, it's purely circular. Let me just explain this circularity to you without all the academic jargon. Superior designs are superior in a specific way. And the way they're superior is they survive. But from that, it follows that they will be the survivors, because nature always does its math, natural selection math, correctly. But if they are the survivors, therefore they are the fittest. But if they are the fittest, they are therefore the superior designs. You see how we've reasoned ourselves in a circle? That is literally Gould's argument here. He's reasoning himself right into a circle. And I can understand why Brady's a little miffed by that, because it's the circular argument. And Gould certainly had the ability to reason in a non-circular fashion. Now, I can understand this natural selection was not necessarily Gould's research focus, so I can understand maybe him just accepting what other people have told him. So I'm not blaming Gould, and I'm not saying that Brady should have said some of the stuff he said. But Brady's right about Gould's logic. It's circular. It just wanders itself right around on itself. It is, of course, necessary to determine empirically that there are survivors, but since this singular fact was among the data we started out to explain, we already know it. Indeed, we also predict it, for since the theory states that the superior design should survive, we look about us and find that, by Jove, they have. Understanding, of course, that any survivors are already known to be the superior design. It is truly marvelous. Oh, this is sarcasm. I can tell you this sentence is sarcasm. It is truly marvelous to see what one can determine prior to the inception of actual research. What on earth was bothering that chap Bethel? Apparently, Gould has touched on a nerve for the English chap Brady, because, youch!
Ouch!
Oh! Good grief, I don't even know, like, oh, that's painful. That's painful.
See now, if I could just do a little timeout here.
Go ahead.
I'd like to thank people in the chat. Please tag us if you want us to comment on something. I see the chat is lively, and that's just glorious.
Yes.
And you're seeing that an otherwise boring Nerds Go Clubbing. Again, the reason this is called Nerds Go Clubbing, this is journal clubbing. This is how, normal people do night clubbing. That's where they get the word go clubbing. Mm-hmm. Nerds, this is how we do clubbing. Okay. With journal clubs. We're having a lot of fun with this paper because we're just laughing. We can't believe that this farce has gone on for so long.
Yeah, because it's a joke. This is a joke, and
I don't want to attribute totally nefarious reasons for this, like they're trying to like Christianity. That's the narrative you'll get from other creationist organizations. I'm a little more charitable than that, and I can honestly say I see kind of this physics envy. There are 4 quantities that define physics: mass, time, charge, and there was one other thing: mass, time, charge, and distance or length. because you have the dimensions of space. You can build all physics is defined on all the quantities like joules and watts and kelvins. You can all reduce it to those 4 base units: time, length, mass, and charge. And if I lift out something, that'll still cover a huge amount of how we do physics. So it's understandable they want like one quantity that they can just try to define biology, and they're trying to call it fitness, and it's not working. It's not working.
Yeah. And
because designs transcend physics. It doesn't mean it violates it, it transcends it. You can't explain designs. This is something Michael Polanyi, and this is a good discussion with our philosopher Danny. There are aspects of reality that transcend physics, meaning a car transcends physics. You can explain its operation, but you can't explain its origin in terms of pure physics. It's expressed differently, and it's no one number. You can't reduce it to those 4 quantities. They have tried gallantly and understandably, because physics is so successful because it can define so much of reality in terms of simple, reducible, what they call reductionism to simple concepts. And you can explain so much of reality and reduce it. And what they're trying to do is be reductionistic here. They're trying to reduce biology to one quantity, and it doesn't work. We're finding, so I'm not trying to, I really want to say, having been around these guys and read their stuff, that we have the group of people that are really just anti-Christian, and they do have nefarious motives. But what we're dealing with here, this whole thing of the emergence of fitness, I'm seeing it. They're suffering from trying to make it like physics and have the success of physics, and they're finding out the hard way it doesn't work. Designs transcend simple descriptions, simple differential equations. Physics can be described, a lot of it, in second-order differential equations, which makes it very powerful. That's why you can fit the major pillars of physics on just one page. Like I suffered through 5 years of schooling to see it's reduced to one page. You can't do that with biology.
Yeah, I'm going to go out on a little bit of a limb here, and I'm going to say that I'm not sure beyond like some very broad generalizations, that you can even make specific across-kind predictions in a lot of cases. Like from the stuff I'm seeing, I'm not sure you can make the kind of broad generalization. I mean, you can make some broad generalization, but other than like really high-level stuff, I'm not sure that you can make generalizations much beyond the kind.
Yeah, and we're talking about prediction. What they wanted to say, that we want to be able to predict species will survive. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, the ones that survive, that's about the only prediction you can make, because biology is so complex and ecosystems are so complex. Mm-hmm. So what do we do if we're going to try to at least understand biology? I suggested biophysics. And identified biophysics. You can at least say these systems are optimized. And I don't know if you saw that video with William Bialek, and he's saying more perfect than we imagined. Life is more perfect than we imagined. He evaluated the designs for the most part. Unfortunately, one part he did equate it with natural selection, which was really unfortunate. But he equated it with the way we'd assess optimality in terms of engineering and physics. So he would say the shark sensors are optimized to the limit of what you can do with physics in terms of sensing voltage or electric fields. He was saying the eye is optimized at the optimal sensitivity, the ability to detect individual photons. You can't do any better than detecting an individual photon. And then also detecting individual molecules. You can't do any better than detecting an individual molecule. He said you just have this optimal, and then he did one really great part with geometric optics. And then he was saying, okay, if we engineered a system that has this sensory perception, you can't do any better than this. And so now in a paper I was working with Bill Basner, I was arguing. I said, this is the way to do it. We don't do it by fitness and reproductive success. We do it in terms of optimization that the biophysicists are. So there is an out. And when I presented this way back, I believe in December of 2020, that idea was just so foreign to everyone. They said, no, fitness is be defined in terms of reproductive success. What else is there? And it's like, well, there's biophysics, and hardly anyone I don't think there was anyone in the audience that knew biophysics, these fields. So anyway, go on and, yeah, please.
Okay. Let me see. I'm trying to remember where exactly I left off here.
What on earth was bothering this chap, Bethel?
Yes. This miscommunication between Bethel and Gold is typical. Most of the present critics of natural selection have difficulty with the research program that could operationalize it, but have not clearly distinguished the operational formulation of the concepts from the formulation of the theory per se. So in other words, basically people aren't communicating on the same plane. Some people are saying, hey, you got all these problems with how this is being done. And the other people say, well, the theory is great. Well, yes, in theory it's great, but where's the research program? And that's what the other people are saying, essentially. Most defenders have risen to the charge of tautology, explaining once more with feeling that the theory itself is not tautological, but have not gotten around to the problem of operationalizing the concept of fitness. Of course, the fact that some versions of the theory, i.e. differential reproduction, are tautological adds to the confusion. But if the critics, particularly outsiders like Bethel and Macbeth, fail to make enough distinctions through lack of familiarity with the material, the same may not be said of the defenders, who are usually experts in the subject. The critic has the easier job, and it shows. Defenders, even the most knowledgeable, will often be forced to delve rather deeply into philosophical considerations to answer a complaint intuitively advanced by the critic. J. Maynard Smith's 1969 defense of neo-Darwinism is an interesting example of the complexity of defending the position. Smith gave the paper at a symposium attended by Marjorie Green and David Baum, both sometime critics of the neo-Darwinian position. Green, 1969, gives some paper. He was responding to a charge of tautology. He does not cite the source, and decided to defend by showing the neo-Darwinian position to be non-tautological because falsifiable. Because I think that should be because it is falsifiable.
Correct.
Little grammar error there. Sorry about that. Obviously, Smith noted, any position that can be refuted by empirical evidence must be more than a mere repetition of the starting point, since it admits a new element, i.e. the factual data. Although Smith is absolutely correct in this claim, his strategy is not well suited to his purpose. To begin with, by choosing to defend the basic theory against the charge of tautology by reference to empiric tests, Smith has failed to distinguish the formulation of theory per se from the problems of its application to observation, the very thing that has led to difficulty with regard to the arguments of the critics. The theory of natural selection, the heart of Smith's defense, is simply not a tautology in the formulation that recognizes a causal interaction between the organism and its environment, and this point is easily made. It would be a great relief to get the whole problem of tautologist formulation behind us once and for all, but I'm afraid that neither the critics nor the defenders have been very efficient in bringing about this goal. The moment we turn to empiric observation and falsifiability, we must deal with the problem of operationalizing our concepts in a testable way. If one reads the critics carefully, this is obviously the crucial problem, but Smith cannot deal with it directly since he confuses it with proving that the theory, rather than the research program, has the proper form. So basically, Smith's defending the theory, which Brady says, yeah, the theory's fine, but it hasn't been actualized well. It hasn't been researched well. And when people do research, they formulate the research program very poorly. That's essentially what Brady's argument is here.
Okay.
Smith's discussions provide three rather interesting difficulties, which are hardly unique to his paper. His definitions are not operational. He offers a test of a relatively strong part of the theory as if it corroborated a weaker part as well, and he mistakes the canonical value of the theory, the general agreement with known facts, for a basis of testing. Judging from the much greater sophistication of his more recent treatment of the theme, I would suppose that he did not, in the 1969 paper, concern himself with the requirements of a serious program of testing. Yet since he has announced that his subject is falsification, his argument must be judged on this basis, and since the article was recommended by other defenders, Ferguson in 1976, its problems are well worth analysis. Smith, in 1969, offers...
Can we pause here?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just needed to pause because we covered a lot of the paper just now.
Yeah, we did, but it really wasn't. There wasn't a ton there. Unless you wanted to pick out something.
Well, he actually did quote Bruce Lee.
Okay.
The Kung Fu guy. He said, "Once more with feeling." I'm sorry. Why did I? There's all this like little humor there that he may use a phrase that you don't realize he's being a little humorous and colorful.
It's the British dry witticism. That's what it is.
Yes. Now, I really want to thank the readers and the viewers who've joined us to suffer through this paper, because it is digging so much in the minutiae it almost seems repetitious, but it's good because he keeps giving examples of the failures. And if we could just kind of zoom out a little bit and go to the year 2021 and I'd like to relate what's happening. They're trying to, what they really want to prove is that natural selection will accumulate complexity. I mean, that's been kind of the grand thing. They've looked for a mechanism that will, on the assumption of universal common ancestry, that's a separate topic, but let's just assume universal common ancestry. What creates the accumulated complexity of a human brain versus a bacteria? The features of a bacteria. And I'm actually thinking that Brady would like to see this vindicated, that natural selection can be seen as a mechanism of accumulation of beneficial, well, in the design sense, engineered good designs being accumulated over time. And this is before Michael Behe's Darwin's Black Box. Now you look at the 21st century and we're talking about falsification. We are now seeing that natural selection destroys good designs. So in 1979, all they had were these kind of very philosophical things and saying it's tautologous, it's not really falsifiable in its form. That has changed now. We have data that is falsifying what evolutionary by, the title of this paper, does natural selection solve the problem it's trying to really solve? Actually, what's the title of the paper again? Does natural selection?
I don't recall off the top of my head. Natural selection and the criteria by which a theory is judged. Yeah.
So the success of the theory, we're trying to evaluate whether natural selection, the criteria that the theory is judged is whether it describes how things evolve, the mechanism. Because universal common ancestry was starting to be believed by a lot of people. Darwin came along, his mechanism was proposed as a solution that solved the problem of design. It wasn't so much the problem of universal common ancestry. He was trying to overturn Paley. And maybe not too much, but he was considering it. His argument was really a criticism of Paley. It wasn't so much universal common ancestry. It's trying to explain the designs, organs of extreme perfection and complication. Yeah, that's, I believe, chapter 4 of Origin of Species. And so Brady is here. This is the first round where he's saying, you guys haven't succeeded. You haven't even formulated in a way that it's testable. And what happened now in the year 2021, Behe has surveyed the literature. It wasn't necessarily Behe that did the experiments or the observations. He just collected it. And what we're finding is that natural selection is not a good candidate for the accumulation of complexity. And of course, I even cited, my favorite example there, the intelligence declining in humans. Natural selection is degrading it. And that it actually said that in one paper that was cited by Michael Lynch, some guy, I can't pronounce his name, that selection is acting to decrease intelligence. So if the net direction of natural selection is destroying, that's not good for the theory. It's actually being falsified now. So I'm just trying to put this in context. We're slugging through an old paper that is now actually it's almost a little obsolete at this point, but it's a great philosophical analysis, historical analysis of a farce, basically.
Yeah. And a lot of what Brady has said, has brought up as objections, has been confirmed now as we move further along.
That's the difference. So there's some. So for Emory and I have the goal of trying to make this more accessible. It's been done because effectively the biological community has gathered so much data on deteriorating genomes across so many species now. The word reductive. There was even a paper by Eugene Koonin that said reductive evolution is the dominant mode of evolution. Of course, he would qualify that, but I'm just like, you still, he never explains why he's saying that there are these bursts of complexification in the fossil record, but he still didn't explain the mechanism, because the dominant mode, and that we also see operationally, because they keep talking about operationalizing the theory. Now that we've actually tried to do measurements, that we're having observations on the trajectory of genes throughout, or a genome throughout, through time, like the Linsky experiments, we're seeing that the trajectory is natural selection destroys. It does not enable the accumulation. It has a net tendency to remove complexity. And we're going up on an hour and 45 minutes. And that's why I wanted to just pause a little bit, because we're not even halfway through the paper.
Yeah. And I think actually, Sal, I am going to have to wrap it for the night, because I just got a message from my dad saying he wants to call me. So, and he doesn't do that at 11:45 at night. So something's going on.
So go ahead and take care. Let me say a quick prayer.
Yeah. Lord, yeah. No, we can wrap up. Just kind of wrap up real quick, and then I got to take off. So.
All right. Well, let me just say a quick prayer. Oh Lord, may this not be bad news. Just be in the situation. Amen.
Yeah. So we'll pick up whenever the next time we do this with starting with the analysis of the Smith paper. Just the key takeaways from tonight. There are a lot of holes in the way natural selection is used. The idea itself isn't bad, i.e. that the environment influences the survival of organisms, but it's very, very difficult to research that. The way fitness is currently defined is utter garbage, and a lot of the uses of natural selection are also utter garbage. So,
yes. I just to wrap this up, because I do want to always tie it. What does this have to do with the Christian faith? All of this discussion, and evolutionary theory has done a lot of damage to the Christian faith, because it has tried to argue that life did not need God to make it, and yet all of our, not just the Bible, but even traditional Christian creeds have said, God is the maker of life, the Lord, the giver of life, and he's the creator. And the implication is that this is miraculously done. And natural selection has been proposed and is still advertised as the solution for the appearance of design. Someone asked, has Sal ever talked about neutral theory of evolution? I absolutely have. But neutral theory does not explain the complexity of the brain that can have of a human brain that can have all the features that James Tour has described, not to mention all the other neuroscientists. And so I think, we can probably review a little bit, maybe the next time we meet, some of the passages that we just went over. But the whole thing about miscommunication, this is why I said, hey, Emory, why don't you explain what obfuscation is? Because what ends up happening is, I don't think it was deliberate, but that's the net result. It ends up being so confusing, and you get the impression that this is some grand theory that's actually, very profound, and you end up finding it's a farce. And I've gone on record in saying I don't think this was nefarious intent. I think they were trying to echo physics, where physics has just very, very reductionistic, to very simple, compact equations. They can describe so much of reality. They tried to do that with biology. And they said, why don't we make fitness the central quantity? And then, of course, it led to claims like Fisher's fundamental theorem being the central theorem of biology, which it's not.
Yep.
But you can kind of get, they're trying to make it like physics, because physics was such a successful scientific enterprise. And understandably, they tried to duplicate that, but they're finding they can't. Biology is not reductionistic.
Yeah.
It is not reductionistic like physics is, because we have features of engineering and design that transcend simple equations. That's one thing that you'll find out if you're designing. You use the simple equations of physics, but your actual designs cannot be described by simple differential equations. It is far richer than that, and it takes a while to see those subtleties. And this is what I'm seeing here. So I think this paper, people are like, this is too much to digest. And I'll say, okay, the good thing is now in the 21st century, we have Behe, Darwin devolves, makes it the argument a lot simpler. Makes it a lot simpler. We don't have to go through this, but I think this is still a great historical paper because of its criticism of an entire enterprise for over 100 years of where it's been going and how it's just been a disaster. So as a historical paper, this is just outstanding. And it's too bad more evolutionary biologists don't consider the things written here. I mean, seriously consider it. And I really would like to go back to the part about Smith more, maybe the next time we meet, because that was actually pretty rich.
Yeah, we can pick that up next time we talk.
Yes. All right. Emory, if you'd like to bail out, I'm gonna just have some words with the audience a little bit. So
yeah, I do need to bail. I'm sorry, guys. Don't normally get text at 11:45 at night. So
okay.
But thank you all very much. Thank you, Sal, for having me. Thank you, everybody, for attention and some very good conversations in the side chat, and some good questions and good thoughts. So thank you all very much for that. And I'll be back whenever Sal needs me. Sal, you've got my email, so just let me know when you want me back.
All righty. I will.
Have a good one, guys. Take care.
God bless you.
Bye.
So, audience, if you had some questions, I wanted to thank, there's Cosmic Purse here. I haven't seen the handle before, so I'd like to thank you if you're a first-time visitor, and thank you for asking the question about neutral evolution. Just for the audience's sake, as a matter of principle, it started with maybe a little bit of Haldane's analysis, but then it was really well developed by Matu Kimura and then others. The idea of neutral evolution, and you can actually Google this and look at the wiki entry. It actually has a good entry on what neutral evolution is. It's the idea that most molecular evolution is free of selection. That the way that the molecules of life, like particularly the genome, it evolved to where it is, not because of selection deciding what the nucleotides would be. And that's the neutral theory of evolution. Now, interestingly, we might be able to maybe put a guess on the percentage, and this actually does relate to genetic entropy. The percentage of the genome that could be under selection is very small, like on the order of 1 or 2%. And if you go back to some of the papers in the 1970s, that's where the idea of junk DNA came about, because they said, well, there's no way the whole genome could be under selection. Maybe to understand this, just do a thought experiment and imagine a population of just 2 people that's maintained over time. I know this is totally artificial, but this is for educational purposes only. And say you have thousands of traits and you only have 2 individuals. Mathematically, you can only select for either a partial part of a trait or one trait at a time. You can't select simultaneously under that population structure for so many traits. And so the amount of the amount of traits that can be simultaneously selected for is dependent on the number of individuals. And when you work through the math, and it's rather complicated, one can figure out then, okay, what percentage of the genome can be under selection. And so this relates to the problem of genetic entropy. That even if there are bad traits that are compromising the genome, selection cannot, even as a matter of principle, eliminate them. Now, there are all sorts of, let's see here. Yes, we're nearly neutral. That was Atta's theory. So how this relates to genetic deterioration is if selection cannot even see bad traits, they'll accumulate. And what I've been a little bit upset about is they're trying to pin this on Dr. Sanford. This is something that's known, and it's still kind of an open problem. Is probably well summarized by Kondrashov. He said, "Why haven't we died 100 times over?" Now he proposes some of his ideas based on synergistic epistasis, and there's still problems with that because that won't solve. One, it's a very generous assumption, and it's one that not even Dan Greyer would accept, another evolutionary biologist. And it's been a while since I've dealt in that area of population genetics, but the bottom line is we are in a position, it's like, okay, whatever the theories say, we can actually track, because we're very interested in heritable diseases, and we can now sequence genomes relatively cheaply compared to where it was before in the 20 years ago. We can track whether our genomes are deteriorating in a functional, operational, medical sense. And I personally don't know of any major medical researcher or geneticist who's tracking human heritable diseases that thinks the human genome's improving. The consensus seems to be it's deteriorating, and we can apply some of the population genetic principles to this. And it borrows some of the math from neutral theory. It's not completely that, but it borrows some of the math. I have some videos on this where I take the Poisson distribution and show how this deterioration can happen. It'll demonstrate the deterioration if you're willing to accept an engineering definition of fitness versus the evolutionary definition, which will not actually capture genetic deterioration, because when we mean genetic deterioration, we usually mean in the medical sense, not this fitness and reproductive advantage sense. So one example that I did point out, and I'm sorry to harp on this, but it's kind of easy to remember, that intelligence is being selected against right now. The IQ points are deteriorating. We know that highly intelligent women have a disproportionate amount of childlessness compared to the less intelligent population. That will not result in the human mind improving from this point on. I don't know anyone that can see any reason that this trend would ever reverse. So if you will excuse me, what I can do, because someone, Cosmic Purse, had asked specifically about this, I'm going to try to put in the chat something where I do show this with. I just take the Poisson distribution and show how how genetic deterioration is inevitable if the genome is mostly functional. So it may be neutral in the sense of selective advantage, but if we find that there are mechanical, physiological, anatomical features where most of the genome, even the repetitive elements, and I've actually studied some of those, like the ALU elements, have purpose in the genome, this Poisson distribution will show the conclusion is genetic deterioration. It would be inevitable. And some of my professional research, when I was tasked to look into the ENCODE project and the 4D nucleome, was to look at how the genome could actually be used, even though it's non-coding. One thing we're finding is it's a very good scaffold, very well designed parking lot for gene regulation. Chromatin, the DNA is wound around these things called histones, and the histone DNA complex, plus a little bit more, makes what we call chromatin. Chromatin is an incredible random access memory. It can do computation. One person had one individual has suggested that the chromatin code is actually Turing complete, which would make it a powerful computer. So let me just briefly see if I could find, if I have it handy. Hang on, let me do a search, because I appreciate the interest from a technical standpoint. So let me see, toy. Okay. I'm going to put, this does relate somewhat to the question of neutral mutations, but it borrows some of the math and the concepts. It's not exactly the question you're asking, but I think this is the more important thing that people are missing. So cosmic purse, I'm gonna type this in. Okay, there you go. Thank you. Thank you for your interest. Thank you very much for your interest. If there are questions or comments, I can actually, while we're reading the paper, I couldn't really read the comment section. So if there's something I missed and you'd like to talk about it, please put it in the chat. So I'm just going to peruse here in the meantime. Okay. One Cow Stampede says, I've read the 4th or 5th edition. And I need to point out something, One Cow. Genetic, and this was a discussion Dr. Sanford and I and Bill Basner and another very prominent population geneticist who will not be named at this time had. And genetic entropy used the evolutionary definition of fitness. My later work with Dr. Sanford and Dr. Basner and this other geneticist, population geneticist, who's ID friendly, and he's very good. Oh my goodness, he's really good. I put it on the table. I said, guys, this is problematic. And again, that example of stupidity being a favored trait, it would be classified as beneficial, as overall a collection. I mean, it's not a single trait, but let's say it's a collection of traits that makes the IQ either lower or higher. The lower IQ then would be considered a beneficial collection of traits. And I said, this is problematic. And there was a book called Survival of the Sickest that's saying why we need disease, like high cholesterol and diabetes and Tay-Sachs disease and sickle cell anemia. And my jaw was dropping. I said, okay, there's a disconnect between what we consider like the medical or engineering notion of fitness versus the population genetic notion of fitness. And I said, most of Genetic Entropy, the book, has been framed in not most of it, but when they talk about the theory, when it's referencing population genetic theory, it was using the evolutionary definition of fitness. There are times in Dr. Sanford's book where it dropped that, which is great, but it wasn't quite as explicit as Michael Behe and Darwin devolves. So I think the two perspectives complement each other. Genetic entropy does leverage population genetics really well and points out why functionality cannot be developed as a matter of principle. If ENCODE is right, and I'd actually say 40 nucleome, which is more important, that the genome is mostly functional. It's incompatible with evolutionary theory in the sense that if you're arguing natural selection could build this, it would have to evolve neutrally. And then it's like, well, okay, what then makes it do that? You'd have to invoke some sort of intelligence. So one alternative that is proposed by the ultra-naturalists is like, well, the genome's intelligent. So it's intelligent design, but it's had nothing to do with God or miracles. And at least I think they're at least headed in a little bit better direction. They're acknowledging that this cannot be the process of random mutation and natural selection. So I definitely need to do a thorough reading of genetic entropy. So, I think that we're going to go through some iterations as we try to, we've put some ideas on the table. Where I personally have been looking into is just kind of the biology. Even though genetic entropy was written in 2005, and there's so much that's happened since then. It's just unbelievable. And I've had the privilege of sharing some of this here, and I hope to share some more. So I'm looking here. One reason, I'm just going to highlight some reason the notion of selection is ineffective catch-all explanation for anything other than phenotypic survival patterns. It almost always insufficient as a causal explanation. And I think the thing about Darwin Duvall's, which is Michael Behe's book, and it's an important thing, selection actually destroys complexity. It's not even a causal explanation for complexity. It actually is the mechanism that destroys complexity over time. It may help. It may help in some cases to preserve the species, but it's kind of like it's kind of the agent that will say, okay, you want to survive, this is the cost. You're going to have to dump these parts of your genes, and we're finding that. So the term that is used for microorganisms, but really could be generalized to other creatures, is reductive evolution. That's the term evolutionary biologists themselves have used. So when I argue this, I don't use the word genetic entropy because that's too associated with creationism. I'll try to use terms that evolutionists themselves have used, which is reductive evolution. And I'm just going through, okay, is there a practical road to less genetic degradation? Oh my goodness, this is... Is there a practical road? All right, so let me thank you for the comments and questions. Okay, I'll give you Dr. Sanford's viewpoint, and I thoroughly agree with him. There's no reversing this. It is genetic degradation in the human genome is irreversible. It is irreversible. We can maybe take steps to reduce the mutation rates in our bodies. First of all, our somatic cells, but then also our germline cells. Like if we can reduce some of the pollutants in the environment or our exposure to them. I mean, one that's really obvious, like don't go around where there's a nuclear dump and there's lots of radiation. That should be like a no-brainer. I mean, but now what we're finding is there are a lot of chemical agents that we suspect are affecting our genome. And so the sad news is that that's about all we could do. We can manage the symptoms, but the degradation is inevitable. As Jesus said, this world is passing away, and the world of humans is passing away pretty fast. I know of when I was in my debate with Dr. Dan, who I'm really on good terms with, and I respect him. I asked him, "Do you think the genome's improving?" I don't think he said yes. It was kind of hard actually to determine what his position was. But if we're talking about improvement in terms of functionality, not reproductive success, I'm sad to say the human race is dying, and I think collectively we have to come to terms with that. But the creationists, ironically, death is telling us that the creation viewpoint is right. Humanity was recent, and it also is telling us we have to set ourselves right with God because time is running out. Time is running out. All right, another question from Hate Love. Thank you for that question. How does one evolve today exactly? Is there a consensus on the next step? No, there's not a consensus, but I'll tell you a troubling thing. And S.J. Tomlinson covered this on her channel. There is what they call the singularitarians. There are a lot of people in Google that are saying, oh, the next step is humans are going to be integrated with machines. It's transhumanism. I don't know a lot about it, okay? I worked for briefly when I worked for a think tank, very much in passing, I worked with a nanomolecular research group. And the head of that nanomolecular research group probably was a singularitarian because he said, death's going to be obsolete. Death is going to be obsolete. And I saw that quote in stuff that on a popular press site, and I went to him. I said, Dr. Ellenbogen, did you really say that? Did you? He said, oh, that was the least outrageous thing I've said. Yes, I did say that, and that was the least outrageous thing. I'm just like, whoa. So what's the next step? As a creationist, I'd say the next step is the Lord has to return and rescue his people, because to quote a great scientist and also a Christian, William, I think his name's William Thompson, Lord Kelvin, he said, we have the sober scientific certainty that the heavens and earth will wax old as doth the garment. Dark indeed would be the prospects of humanity if we were not illuminated by that light. In fact, why don't I get the quote? Kelvin, it's beautiful. Actually, two quotes. Stitched together. He actually did say this, but scientific. I almost knew this by heart because it was so let me read it. And I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. But the thing is, the bad news tells us that the gospel is true, that genealogy in Luke chapter 3 can be believed. Now, I know, even me, I'm skeptical, have gone back and forth, but there's hope. When I heard that, I said, this really could be true. There's a chance. And it's enough to, when I was struggling with the faith, I said, this is enough to go on. Because up until that point, I had very little hope that, I nearly left the faith. I said, I want to have at least some scrap of evidence that make this persuasive. And, God does conceal things. He doesn't make it easy to come to the faith. So let's see if I have it here, the quote from Lord Kelvin. And by the way, this is a great website. I'm going to see if I could put it up here. It's Creation Evolution Headlines. If you're not familiar with it, I'm sometimes an author on that website. And let's see. See if I could find that quote. Oh, this is a great biography of a Christian who is also a great scientist. And see if it's at the end. Yes, here it is, the quote. We have the sober scientific certainty that the heavens and earth shall wax old as doth a garment. Dark indeed would be the prospects for the human race if unilluminated by that light which reveals new heavens and a new earth. Isn't that a beautiful quote? I think that's just a beautiful quote. So, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news here, but I hope that that is comforting. It escaped my mind. I wanted to make one more comment on that. Dark indeed would be the prospects for the human race if unilluminated by that light which reveals new heavens and earth. So this actually was not talking about genetic entropy. It was talking about thermodynamic entropy because Lord Kelvin worked a lot on thermodynamic entropy. And it was, he was observing that we have the sober scientific certainty that the heavens and earth shall wax old as doth a garment. And this is before the Big Bang Theory. He was actually beginning to lay some of the foundations of the idea that the universe is not eternal and it can't be as a matter of principle. It implied the universe had a beginning and it will also have an end. So there's something I wanted to say about this, and it escaped me, and I feel really bad about that. Dark indeed would be the prospects for the human race if unilluminated by that light which reveals new heavens and earth. If it comes to me, maybe it wasn't that significant, and that's probably why I forgot it. So let's see. If there are any other questions, then otherwise we might. I might be winding down the stream. Maybe it was regarding Creation Evolution headline. That's a fun website to go to. So I actually might cover some of the articles on there, and even the ones that I wrote for Creation Evolution headlines. Hate Love Nothing says, genetic entropy is a victory in one respect, but has me worried. Yes. Oh, now I remember what I wanted to say, because you're at. Is there a practical road? Is there a practical road? Now I remember what I wanted to say regarding all this. Is there a practical road? And it's something, and the short answer is no, unfortunately. The short answer is no. Dr. Sanford and I agree on this. Now we do genetic engineering for plants, and he became very famous because he was a pioneer of one of the devices used in genetic engineering called the gene gun. In fact, it's in the collection of the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. So it was a big deal. But one thing that's not talked about in genetic engineering is all the things that go wrong. So to get one creature the way you want, you're going to make a lot that are defective. So if we even applied some of the modern technologies, not the gene gun, other technologies, like one that you hear about a lot is CRISPR-Cas9. And I remember my professor of biochemistry was talking about it, and she was saying there are a lot of misfires. So let's say we're trying to repair just one gene in a human being. And I don't know what the failure figures are, but let's say it's about 9 failures for every success. Are we willing to tolerate the possibility of creating 9 birth defects to rescue one gene? And so they're ethical considerations, but they're also practical considerations in terms of the complexity. Do we think we can really carry this out? Because there's a lot more we're finding out about biology than just the genome. We have the glycome. We have stuff that we call epigenetics. I don't like that term. But there are other aspects that that are there. The complexity could be so great we might not be able to do this. I mean, especially now with the stuff we're learning about the 4D nucleome, there's just stuff we don't know, and the complexity could be beyond our reach. I would also wager that God designed it that way, that there would be things where we could not effect our own salvation, not just spiritually, but even physically. God's ordained it that we're going to be humbled and going to have to turn to Him. I think it could be this very sober scientific certainty that the only way the human race will be rescued, and sadly only a remnant of the human race rescued, just like in Noah's flood, hopefully not quite that bad, okay, is through faith in Jesus Christ and His return. So that I'm getting very theological now, but that's what I feel. So there it is from a genetic engineer himself who's been concerned about repairing the genome, and he says it probably is beyond our capabilities. And from what I've heard, this is very concerning. There are both ethical barriers and also engineering and biological barriers to repairing the human genome. And then this also raises the question, okay, if you wanted to do this sort of repair, this is another ethical. The most easy way to do it is to take the most functional genomes. So we're going to do selective breeding of humans and say, okay, so-and-so, you're not going to reproduce. You can raise offspring that are not yours biologically. That might be feasible, but you can't reproduce your own kids because you have an unfit genome. So practically speaking, are we going to do that? The other thing that Dr. Sanford pointed out in his book, which I also do find alarming, is that on average, some of the best numbers we have, and this is also quoted by evolutionary biologist Dan Grauer, that we have 100 new mutations per individual per generation. So, okay, so let's say we're trying to fix 1 point mutation in a human being. All right, so you fix that one, but then just the fact that you're bringing into the world a new human being, he has 100 more. So you have to reverse all the 100 that are being added in the process of replication, plus you're trying to fix this. And then you have all the ethical concerns and basically what's equivalent to eugenics. So it's not looking good. And I, sad to say this, I think that's by design. And what I mean by that is when God cursed the world, these are the inevitable consequences. So I'm sorry to end on that note. But because I've dealt with death recently in my own personal life. Some of you know that my mother passed away. The Apostle Paul comforts us and said, we do not grieve like those with no hope, because our hope is not in this world. So let's see. I'm going to look for some more, and this is just a great conversation. As just some administrative things, I may be appearing with Rob Stadler. It depends on whether I can get my act together. It's already Monday, and I have to meet with him Tuesday to see if we're going to have our show on Thursday. I'm still going to try. This will be the debate that never was, because he and I were in negotiations with another party on the question of whether is DNA evidence of God. And when the other party in the negotiations found out the first team would be me and Rob Stadler, the negotiations broke down. Rob Stadler is an extremely accomplished scientist. He's a Harvard, MIT PhD in biomedical engineering, and millions of people have his medical devices implanted in them. They're alive today. Millions of people owe their lives to his inventions. And he has 140 patents. And he wrote the book, co-authored it with Change Tan, The Stairway to Life, that criticizes abiogenesis. Really qualified. The other side said they don't want to deal with what he wrote in the book. They gave some excuses like, I'm not going to read that. I'm just like, okay, it's your loss. So I said, hey, Rob, they backed out. But since I ensnared you in this, why don't we just go ahead and state what we would have if the debate went forward. But now we won't have the constraints of time and all the kind of the sketchy debate tactics that go on in debates. We can just state our case, and so that it's tentatively scheduled for Thursday. But if not, it's just going to be pushed back. It's something we want to do. I've also been informed there's been a negotiation between James Goods contacted me. He said, "Would you debate James Downard on intelligent design?" I said, "Yes." Now, I've already said I don't like doing debates, and I'm going to try to avoid them. But if James Coons approaches me, out of a favor to him and his channel, and for helping me get my start on the internet, I'm going to accept, because I want to show that I'm not afraid to engage the other side. But then it just gets impractical, because we get some of these people that are not, like on Reddit, there are 100 people that want me to respond to them. It's like, I don't have time for you guys. Most of you guys are not educated. I can tell that just by the questions you ask. And it's things I've already responded to a bazillion times. At least it feels that way. And I just don't feel like regurgitating it. Go to my channel and see what I've said. That would be about my explanation, because I said I have probably at this point 100 hours of video. Why don't you go to my channel, go to my writings, look at the really technical stuff, like this, what I've written on population genetics or protein biology and structural biology and biochemistry and organic chemistry and thermodynamics. Then we can have a conversation. But I'm not going to waste time with you guys. And one guy has been trying to email me. I blocked him. I said, you're just trying to taunt me. I said, why should I waste my time on you? That being said, I do think we should engage arguments that I think are first class, and that biology students who are Christians and are struggling with their faith would be hearing these arguments. I want to address those. Those are worth addressing. Those are worth my time. Dealing with trolls that just want to troll and spam and just distract. No, I don't have time for that. So I think my debate is at 5 p.m. with James Downard. As soon as it's announced, I will post a link on my channel. And the question is intelligent design. Now, I don't think James will mind me mentioning this. He was suggesting alternative titles for the debate. He said, do you have a model? And I said, I absolutely will not put that on the table. And I'll give the reason why. My understanding is his idea of a model is you could explain it scientifically in terms of laws of physics or whatever. And I'm just like, well, if the mechanism, i.e. God, is beyond human comprehension and cannot be reduced to physics, you're not going to have a model. Or for that matter, anything to do with intelligence. It could be beyond human reach to describe with a model that is actually directly testable and repeatable. And of course, they'll say, well, then I don't believe in it. I said, why do you believe in evolutionary theory, abiogenesis? Those aren't testable, repeatable, or verifiable either. And it disagrees. Worse, it disagrees with physics. You'd need violations of physics and chemistry that's known, and even what we're beginning to observe in biology. So I'm going to ding him over with that. But I'm not, I just wanted to put it on the table if he complains that Sal was backing away from a debate on models. I'm explaining why, because I don't think we can model it in the terms of science. I'm appealing to a mechanism that's probably beyond human description or comprehension. And, I can understand that they'll say, well, that doesn't make it scientific. And I was like, fine, okay, it could be true, but it's not going to be anything we can compartmentalize in science. So that's coming up. And so while Emory is on semester break, which is about 2 weeks, I'm trying to get his time. So it's not that the whole channel is going to go back to just ultra nerds for like the rest of the time the channel's in existence. It's going to be for this 2 weeks, because I don't get a lot of Emory's time. And when he's in grad school, I want, especially in summer school, which could be really a compressed semester, I want to respect his time. I want him to be successful as a creationist in grad school. I want him to be at the top of his class. We need people like that. And it just so happens, by providence, Dr. Sandy Pigeon will be completing his vacation, and he'll be back, and he'll be on his channel. I am looking for some other co-hosts. I've contacted some other people that I think would be a good fit for this channel. And there's some people that are just so good on their own channel, like John Maddox, that like, well, he's always welcome to come here, but he's just so good on his own channel, you know. I don't want to mess with that, but he's more than welcome to come and join some of the talks. So, you know, right now the pool of co-hosts is Dr. Sandy Pigeon and Emory. And when Sandy Pigeon comes back, our retired Navy SEAL, he's always fun because he has all his stories of his time in the United States Navy, and it adds a little bit of humor and levity to our talks. When he comes back, we'll be talking more about things that are probably topics way more accessible, because his specialty in Christian apologetics is not the science end, which is mine, and that's why it's a good fit. I hope some of you have seen his talk on archaeology, and so we might be covering archaeology and then also just some other areas of Christian apologetics. And there's a question here. Oh, I love it. Would you be interested in hosting the Academy with Emory? Yes, because some of this stuff is getting, I've been looking at the stuff that I think needs to be talked about, but it might actually kind of hurt the channel if I talk too much about really academic matters. And so the short answer, yes. Would you be interested in hosting the Academy with Emory? Yes, absolutely. If you're talking about the Evidence Reasons Academy, yes. The Evidence Reasons Academy also is going to be, I'm going to be trying to fill that out also. I really had to set that aside because my mother was very, very ill. I mean, it was physically just draining. I get 3 hours of sleep, and then I'd have to attend to her, and then I'd crash and get another 3 hours of sleep. It was just very tiring. She's now in better care in the Lord's hands, and some of my time has been freed up. So I would like to do more Academy stuff. What do we do, since we're mentioning the evidence? Is that correct? Am I understanding you right, Godzilla Freak? We're talking about the Evidence Reasons Academy, which I also run. That academy focuses on just teaching basic science, like high school and college level chemistry, mathematics, physics, and biology. But then I'm realizing this would be a good academy to talk about the really advanced graduate level, PhD level stuff that I work on, which is bioinformatics and structural biology and biophysics, and even cosmology level physics like general relativity, quantum mechanics. So there's a side of me that I need to learn all kind of the basics, and then there's stuff that was in my specialty. And I did tell Dr. Sanford, I said, John, you know, like only 30 people know what I've been working on the last 7 years because it's so specialized. You know, we worked on a specialized enzyme and on a particular history of bacteria. And then there's other stuff that just never got published. It's just like, because the stuff is so technical, and one of the reasons I decided to complete my contract with him is I just had a love for reaching out to wider audiences, and wider being college level audiences versus PhD level scientists who are, you know, I was making presentations to faculty and deans. It's not that I had more knowledge than them, but I just happened to be reporting on fields that they may not have been aware of, namely the 4D nucleome project and other developments like direct coupling analysis and K-modes and all these other things. It's just like, yeah, I know I'm throwing out really technical terms. It's like this is how specialized these fields are that even biologists, most biologists are not acquainted with it. But that's the next frontier in intelligent design. Advanced intelligent design theory will be, you'll start to see it. You'll start to see it maybe on the Academy channel. And yeah, we're going to totally nerd out there. And, you know, maybe only 3 people on the in the blog sphere of our usual group of our community would understand it, but I'm going to put it out there because I think it'll make a statement that creationists are very interested in science, and I can tell you from personal experience that I was a terrible student going through school. I wasn't like Emory. Emory is a really good student. I never was. But when I started to learn intelligent design, I began to value academics more. I said, these unbelievers are going to teach me creation science. So that's what Emory and I are doing. We're going to school and learning. We're learning the tools that'll help us argue the case for creation. Let's see, what is this? As a UGO player, I'm accustomed to learning what's essentially a new language. I've never heard of that. So, So what are some of the other topics I've dealt? Because biology's been a very fruitful field to argue creation science. Physics and geology. There is, general relativity and special relativity are not easy topics. Special relativity is easier. General relativity is really hard. I have done some work on the distant starlight problem, and I've actually done some experiments with laser interferometer trying to reconstruct Reginald Cahill's experiments on detecting variability in the speed of light, which are really exciting stuff. So I might work on that some. As far as geology, some of you have seen some of my postings with Dr. James Carter on the racemization dating. Now, the other side, sometimes they just hear a few things and they'll just dismiss it. They said it's so unreliable. I'm like, wait. There can be variations in the rate of racemization in the amino acids. These are chemical clocks that'll date the fossil record by factors of 60. But that becomes moot if you're finding amino acids in the homochiral state at the Cambrian layers, which is what we're finding. And I'm going to pursue that more. And I've had some discussions with Brian Thomas that I was going to go and look at the original measurements being made. And so people ask me, well, why are you a young earth creationist? I'm like, the data is telling me that these fossils are not, there's a good chance these fossils are young. And then also there's some problems with the stratification. I've been wanting to make a visualization program to try to explain it. It would be a pretty tough animation, but I want to pursue that. So there's no shortage of work to do on creation science, which is going to be hard to fit with a regular day job on top of it. But I'm feeling led of the Lord that we have to be tent makers at this point. It's going to be very hard to be a professional creationist. It's easier if you have a different profession to help sustain you. And that's where I'm aiming for. Before I wrap up, this could be a good year for me getting in peer review, secular peer review, but unfortunately, it's not really creationism. Creationists can get in peer-reviewed secular journals if they're doing things like cancer research, basic research, and that can happen if you're connected to someone who's actually a real researcher, because I couldn't do that as a solo or lead author. And so I'm about to say goodbye. Enjoy your evening, everyone. Thank you, Evidence and Reason. See you all again next time. I must sleep. So, oh my goodness, it is past midnight here on the East Coast. And I'm going to try to recruit Emory, and we'll keep doing this Brady thing maybe tomorrow and maybe Wednesday. God willing, on Thursday, it'll be Rob Stadler. And we'll just go from there. I'd like to thank everyone for their thoughts and prayers. I really have felt the Spirit of God answering your prayers and sustaining me during this difficult time. So take care and God bless you. Good night.